Already in 1909, the leading, quote, our crowd, end quote, families of New York had established their own Bureau of Social Morals, headed by Rabbi Judah P. Magnes. The Bureau hired private detective Abe Schoenfeld, an investigator for John D. Rockefeller, Jr., to infiltrate and profile the organized crime structure centered on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Schoenfeld's mission was hardly that of crime buster, folks. In 1922, Rabbi Magnes took those voluminous files with him when he moved to Jerusalem and founded the Hebrew University. To this day, the genealogy chart of organized crime remains a part of the university's most closely guarded archives. It was during the same period of mounting concern over the exposure of Jewish surnamed gangsters that the Anti-Defamation League was founded, not to protect the Jewish people, but to protect the Jewish criminal element. One of the very first targets of the ADL was New York Police Commissioner Bingham, whom the ADL smeared as an anti-Semite for his efforts to quell organized crime on the Lower East Side. Bingham's crime-fighting efforts were by no means targeted exclusively against Jewish gangsters. His chief detective, Lieutenant Joseph Petrosino, was assassinated in March 1909 in Sicily while meeting with Italian police to establish cooperation in probing links between criminal elements and anarchist networks operating in both the United States and Italy. In 1901, Petrosino had warned the Secret Service about an imminent assassination attempt against President William McKinley. Petrosino had learned of the plot by infiltrating his agents into the Henry Street Settlement House in New York, a hotbed of British Fabian society and international anarchist activity. The Secret Service ignored his warnings, and McKinley was assassinated months later, leaving British agent and B'nai B'rith ally Teddy Roosevelt to assume the presidency. The Nation ADL, still formally called the Publicity Committee of the B'nai B'rith, had assailed Bingham's crime-fighting efforts for maligning Jews and eventually succeeded in having him ousted as police commissioner. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, the ADL is not an arm of the Jewish community, but is an arm of a secret society, a branch of the Illuminati, known as B'nai B'rith, which is controlled by the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Organized crime had a big boost as a result. What's more, the effort to establish the links between organized crime, international anarchist circles, and perhaps the Scottish Rite and B'nai B'rith secret society was stillborn. The man who founded and headed up the ADL for its first 30 years was Sigmund Livingston, a prominent Chicago attorney who had headed up the powerful B'nai B'rith Midwest Lodge No. 6. Livingston was the lawyer for the Chicago and Alton Railways, a company owned by William Moore of the prominent Episcopalian family. From the 1890s, the Moore family had forged a business alliance with the J.P. Morgan banking interests. The Moores, with Morgan Financing, founded the National Biscuit Company, now RJR Nabisco, and United States Steel Corporation. Within 2 generations, members of the Moore family would also control Bankers Trust Company and sit on the board of the International Business Machines Corporation that you know as IBM. The Moore family sponsorship of Livingston, ADL chairman from 1913 to 1945, was a reflection of the underlying relationship between the leading WASP Freemasonic families and the ADL that continues through to the present. The Moore families, Nabisco, and United States Steel are on record today as major financial backers of the Anti-Defamation League. Ironically, Bishop Paul Moore of the same Moore family served for years as the Episcopal Bishop of New York. Based at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, he was the superior to Canon Edward West. Now remember, folks, what I've told you about the Cathedral of St. John Divine in the Mystery School series. Canon West's promise to get his Jewish friends to take care of Lyndon LaRouche provided crucial evidence that the real power behind the ADL and its organized crime confederates is the Scottish Rite. With the ADL's successful drive to oust New York Police Commissioner Bingham, organized crime began to spread its tentacles out into New York City and across the country. By the onset of Prohibition in 1920, the undisputed chief of the New York rackets was Arnold Rothstein, the son of a prominent garment manufacturer and a junior member of the elite, quote, Our Crowd, end quote. Many of the Our Crowd families, like the Lehmans, had come to New York from the South in the post-Civil War period. They were transplanted Confederates who capitalized on the power of the British Rothschild family's Wall Street representative August Belmont to quickly establish themselves among the city's leading bankers and stockbrokers. They had participated in the unsuccessful Confederate secessionist plot against the Union. Now they would take a leading role in the British effort to direct a new opium war against the American people. Rothstein, ladies and gentlemen, operated a gambling and prostitution syndicate out of the Metropole Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, far from the teeming ethnic ghetto of the Lower East Side. He ran the unofficial gambling commission for Tammany Hall boss Timothy Sullivan. He hobnobbed with some of the country's wealthiest legitimate businessmen, like Julius Fleischmann, the yeast manufacturer, Joseph Seagram, the Canadian distiller, Harry Sinclair of the Sinclair Oil Company, and Percival H. Hill, head of the American Tobacco Company. In 1919, Rothstein engineered the fixing of the Baseball World Series on behalf of his gambling cronies in what became known as the Chicago Black Sox scandal. At the behest of Lower East Side gangster Irving Wexler, also known as Waxy Gordon, and Detroit mobster Max Greenberg, Rothstein put up the initial $175,000 to establish the first bootlegging operations of the Prohibition era, servicing the Midwest and the East Coast with British whiskey transported across the Atlantic. Rum-running ships owned by Rothstein and his partners would smuggle the British whiskey from Long Island Sound into the U.S. Rothstein's British contacts included Winston Churchill, who at the time headed the Royal Commission in charge of liquor. In 1921, Rothstein also opened up a British pipeline for smuggling heroin into the United States via his business agent in China, Jacob Katzenberg. Katzenberg hooked up with the British Opium Cartel, then headed by Lord Keswick of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation and the Jardine and Matheson Trading Company, and arranged the transit of the illegal drugs through Marseille into New York City. The route, later known as the French Connection, would remain the primary pipeline of heroin into America up through the 1960s. The period of Prohibition, folks, marks the syndication of organized crime. It also marks the emergence of illegal money as a major source of investment capital and so-called legitimate business. As the proceeds of the billions of dollars in illegal whiskey and dope sales were funneled into such lucrative straight investments as the Hollywood, motion picture, and music industries, the Nevada gambling casinos, Nevada conveniently legalized casino gambling just as Prohibition was coming to an end, and post-Prohibition legal alcohol distilleries, the ADL, was on hand to directly reap the benefits. In 1929, ladies and gentlemen, one of Meyer Lansky's New York City crime lieutenants, Frank Erickson, founded the Sterling National Bank. Erickson was a specialist in money laundering. After Lansky replaced Arnold Rothstein, where he was assassinated in 1926, as the chairman of the board of the National Crime Syndicate, Erickson had been put in charge of the nationwide bookkeeping operations. Erickson handled Lansky's hidden interests in gambling casinos, racetracks, and other businesses around the country. Sterling National Bank served as the mob's factor bank in the New York City Garment Center, doling out high-interest short-term loans to thousands of small clothing manufacturers to purchase their raw materials. The loans were collateralized by the garment firm's accounts receivable. On paper, it was a benign